My son Jacob has always been afraid of the dark. Every night he'd ask me to leave his bedroom door open and the nightlight on, and I'd always agree, understanding his fear, perhaps even better than he did himself. One night, as I was about to leave his room, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Dad, does the devil exist?" I froze, struggling to find an answer. I hoped Jacob hadn't noticed how my hand trembled as I turned off the light. It seemed like my son sensed something that shouldn't belong in his world, a child's world where everything is bright, safe, and predictable. "No, of course not," I replied, trying to hide my unease. I turned on the small lamp on his nightstand and said, "Sleep well, son. I'll leave the door open." That night I couldn't fall asleep. Tossing and turning in bed, I kept recalling my own childhood, the terrifying events that forced me to grow up far too soon. Events no psychologist could ever help me forget, nor could any priest offer me solace. When I was 8, my parents divorced. I stayed with my father in a suburb of Los Angeles, while my mother moved to a small house at the foot of the mountains in Maine. Every year I'd visit her during summer break. Those days were the brightest and happiest of my life, though Mom always insisted I stay close to the house. My mother's home was surrounded by woods. The trees were ancient and so dense that they seemed to encompass the entire world. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, and I felt like I was in a magical place where nothing evil could exist. I'd often ask my mom to go camping with me like my friends did with tents and a campfire, but she'd always find a reason to say no. That year was different. Mom herself suggested we go camping in the woods. We planned to go to the furthest corner, set up camp, and stay overnight. Grandma found out about it the night before and protested more strongly than ever. I overheard their conversation at dinner. "Alice, I don't want you going into the woods overnight." Grandma frowned when she heard our plans. "Mom, don't be so strict. I'll bring flashlights and bear spray. We'll be careful," Mom replied, trying to smile. "It's not about the bears." Grandma frowned even deeper, putting down her spoon. "There are things far worse than bears." Mom chuckled, but I felt a twinge of anxiety, though I didn't understand why. Late at night I woke up and heard them talking again. Quietly, I crept to the door and listened. "Alice, please don't take the boy too far. In the forest, strange things happen there." Grandma's voice trembled. "Mom, it's just the woods. You believe in legends. I'm a grown woman, and Jacob is already 8. We'll only stay one night." "Don't say that, Alice. You don't understand. I used to be that sure too." Grandma moved closer and took Mom's hand. "Do you remember that time in my youth when I stayed in the woods with your father?" "I remember your story. But Mom, let's be honest, it was so long ago." Mom sighed wearily, but Grandma didn't let go of her hand. "I'll never forget it." Grandma sighed, her voice dropping to an unnatural whisper. "We went mushroom picking, and something was there. We heard footsteps, saw shadows. They followed us, watching our every move. They lured us deeper, making us lose our bearings. And all the while, we heard a voice, as if someone was whispering our names, calling us." A chill ran down my spine and I barely stifled a gasp. Mom pulled her hand back and looked at Grandma, openly irritated. "We're only going for one night with everything we need. We'll be fine." Grandma turned away, sighing heavily. It seemed like she wanted to say something more but changed her mind. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep, replaying every word of their conversation in my mind. The next morning, Mom and I set out. I noticed Grandma approach Mom just before we left, quietly handing her a small bottle. Mom smiled distractedly and nodded, tucking it into her backpack. We walked along the trail all day, going deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, blocking out the sunlight. It was around 5 in the evening when we finally reached a small clearing suitable for camping. Mom set up the tent, and with the bottle Grandma had given her, she circled the campsite, sprinkling holy water. We lit a campfire, made a simple dinner, and sat quietly, enjoying the silence of the forest. I couldn't wait to sleep. Mom whispered, "If you get cold, let me know." And I nodded, dozing off in her arms. I woke up in the middle of the night. The silence was absolute, and it felt as though the darkness was alive, as if someone invisible was watching my every move. I wanted to wake up Mom, but she was sound asleep. The urge to go to the bathroom became unbearable, and I decided to step outside alone, grabbing a small flashlight. The light from the flashlight drove away some of the fear, and I cautiously walked to the edge of the clearing. After I was done, I turned around, ready to return to the tent when I saw it. In the depths of the forest, right between the trees, stood a figure barely visible in the darkness. It was a woman in a long white dress. She was staring directly at me, unblinking, with a frozen, unnatural smile that made my heart tighten. She didn't move, just kept watching, and I felt terror take over my entire body. "Who are you?" I whispered, but there was no answer. The woman suddenly raised her hand and waved at me, slowly, as if inviting me to come closer. I dropped the flashlight and dashed back to the tent. Once inside, I crawled into my sleeping bag, trembling all over. Mom woke up from my scream. I told her about the woman I had seen in the forest. She tried to calm me, saying it was just a dream, that I had imagined it. But I knew what I saw. I knew it was real. We stayed in the tent, but I couldn't sleep again. I kept my eyes on the entrance, feeling the fear grow inside me. Outside, I heard faint footsteps as if someone was approaching. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. "Who's there?" Mom whispered, gripping the flashlight. There was no answer. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent, and I felt Mom tense beside me. A light tap on the tent wall made us both jump. "Please help me," came a quiet female voice. I froze, feeling a chilling fear fill my body. Mom pointed the light at the tent wall, and we saw the outline of a female figure illuminated by the beam. She stood at the entrance, distorted by the flashlight's glow, as if she didn't fully belong to this world. Her silhouette was blurry, strange, as if her body was only imitating a human form. The woman spoke again, but this time her voice was filled with despair. "Please, I'm so cold. Let me in. I'm lost." I looked at Mom, and she met my frightened gaze. I could see she was just as scared as I was, though she tried to hide it so as not to frighten me further. She hesitated, then firmly gripped my shoulder and whispered, "We're not going out, Jacob. Everything will be fine. Just stay still and don't speak." Outside, we heard more rustling, then silence. We held our breath, but soon the footsteps resumed, circling the tent softly and smoothly, like the rustle of wind among dry leaves. We heard the stranger continue speaking, her voice becoming increasingly strange, almost mocking. "Come on, don't you feel sorry for me? You always help. Everyone. In this forest." Her voice trembled, as if her words struggled through a thick wall. "Let me in." Mom clutched my hand tightly. She turned on the flashlight and whispered, "Jacob, listen to me. We're not leaving here, no matter what." The woman outside continued to circle the tent, and I felt nausea rising in my throat. At some point, her voice sounded right above us, as though she were hovering over the tent, suspended in the air. "I know you, Jacob. Don't you want to talk to me? Remember that dream when you were alone? You were so helpless then, you called for me. I closed my eyes, trying to block out her words, but they seemed to seep into my mind, filling every cell. I knew that voice was somehow connected to what had happened in the forest years ago with Grandma and her husband. Mom resolutely turned off the flashlight and whispered in my ear, "We're just here for the night, Jacob. Just make it through the night, and everything will be fine in the morning." But I could no longer hear anything except the strange, hypnotic words of this entity. And then, as if by magic, everything fell silent. Dead silence blanketed the forest, as though someone had erased all sounds, even the wind. I looked at Mom and she nodded, indicating that everything was okay, that maybe it had all been our imagination. The silence lasted several minutes. Mom reached for the flashlight again, but I grabbed her hand, trying to stop her. As soon as we moved, something brushed along the tent, a touch so silent yet palpable. Fear gripped my heart once more. And then outside, a new voice sounded. It was rougher, louder, as though someone entirely different had approached our tent. "Alice, it's me." The male voice was low and commanding. Mom sat up abruptly, suppressing a gasp that escaped her lips. "Don't you recognize me? It's Antonio, your old friend." Mom froze as though she had suddenly uncovered a terrible secret. I saw her eyes widen with horror. "Antonio, but—" Her voice trembled. "You died. Many years ago. You couldn't. This can't be. Alice, have you forgotten your old friend? I've come back. Now you must help me. We just want to come in to rest. I'm lost, I'm cold. And this girl too. She's been waiting a long time to meet you." Mom didn't respond. Her hands trembled, and I could sense she was on the verge of unzipping the tent, but I clung to her arm and whispered, "Mom, don't do it, please." Her eyes were full of fear, and I saw her fighting against the unknown horror that had gripped her mind. The male voice outside continued, coaxing, "Won't you open the door for me, Alice? We were so close, and now when I stand before you, you refuse to help me." "That's not true. It's not true. You're dead, I know," she nearly shouted, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. Her only answer was cold laughter. It echoed through the forest like someone laughing from the heart of the darkness. "Come, Alice, come to me. I'll show you everything. Do you remember that day by the river when we were kids? You called for me?" With difficulty, Mom lifted the flashlight, but the light didn't penetrate the darkness surrounding the tent. It seemed to absorb everything, and I felt that even the light could no longer save us. Outside, footsteps sounded again, followed by the woman's quiet voice. "Jacob, your mom is with us. You can come out too. We'll be waiting for you." I closed my eyes, and the world disappeared, leaving only the terror that filled me to the brim. Suddenly, Mom pressed close to me, whispering what seemed like a prayer, words I couldn't understand. The voices outside started to fade, and soon they were gone. But I knew it was just a game. Silence, tense and unnatural, hung around us. It felt as though even the forest was holding its breath. Mom was still holding my shoulders, pressing me close to her. I could feel her heart pounding wildly, just like mine. For a moment I thought it was over, that we had survived, but instinct warned me not to relax. "Jacob," Mom whispered softly, "it's going to be okay. As soon as the sun rises, we'll leave." Her words were meant to reassure me, but instead, they only made me feel worse. Something wasn't right. Suddenly I realized that the darkness around the tent seemed too dense, too alive. And then it hit me. We couldn't hear the usual sounds of the forest. No rustling leaves, no birdsong. Nothing. It was as if this part of the forest had been completely cut off from the rest of the world. Suddenly, a new sound broke the silence. It was a distant, muffled moan that quickly drew closer. Goosebumps rose on my skin and I glanced at Mom. She heard it too and tightened her grip on my hands. "It's just the wind," she muttered, as if trying to convince herself. But we both knew it wasn't the wind. We froze, listening. The moan grew louder, turning into a deep, hollow groan like someone was wailing in pain or terror. And the sound was coming from deep within the forest, drawing closer. I couldn't take it anymore and whispered, "Mom, I'm scared. Maybe we should leave right now." She hesitated for a moment and I saw her lips tremble. She was clearly thinking about running too, but realized that trying to escape into the pitch-black forest might be even more dangerous. "We'll wait until morning," she replied, though her voice lacked confidence. "The night is almost over. Dawn will come soon." We sat still in the darkness, trying not to breathe, hoping not to attract the attention of whoever or whatever was outside. And then I heard a quiet whisper, as if someone was standing right outside the tent, speaking my name. "Jacob. Jacob." My body froze in terror. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried a cold, icy emptiness. I shrank, pressing closer to Mom, and she only held me tighter. Her hands were trembling, and I knew she was just as terrified as I was. "Don't listen to them," she whispered. "They're not human, Jacob. Just stay close to me and everything will be fine." The whisper came again from outside, but now the voice was even softer, as if it were sharing a secret. "Don't you want to know who I am? You've always wanted to know the truth, haven't you?" The words seeped into my mind and I felt my control slipping. The voice was mesmerizing, pulling me in, promising something incredible. I barely resisted the urge to go to the entrance and open it. But at that moment Mom turned me toward her, forcing me to look into her eyes. "Jacob, don't look over there, do you hear me? It's important. They're trying to lure you. Never open the tent, no matter what you hear." Her voice was tense but firm. I nodded, feeling her words anchor me. But suddenly, footsteps sounded outside again, and the woman's voice spoke, this time with reproach. "Alice, do you remember how you promised to come back? We've waited so long for you. Why are you running from us?" Mom paled and stared toward the entrance, as if hearing more than just a voice. Her face twisted in pain as though each of these words hurt her physically. She exhaled shakily, struggling to regain control. It's a trick," she finally said. "They're trying to confuse us. Jacob, stay close." We remained in the tent, surrounded by darkness and strange voices that came closer, then drifted away. Sometimes it seemed they had faded, but just as I allowed myself to believe it, they would start whispering my name again, calling to me like an old friend, as if we had known each other since childhood. Time stretched endlessly, and I felt as though the night would never end. Finally, at some point I sensed a change. A glimmer of light, a real warm light of the morning sun, seeped into the tent. I opened my eyes and saw that Mom had noticed it too. She exhaled in relief, a faint hope reflected in her eyes. "Jacob, we're leaving. Right now." We packed up quickly, leaving the tent and half of our gear behind, and headed toward the trail. The pale morning light filtered through the forest, and with each step, we left the dark clearing further behind. I felt the fear slowly dissipating, though I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. We walked in silence, trying not to look back, and eventually reached the road, where our neighbor, Uncle Bill, was waiting. He looked concerned, and when he saw us, his eyes widened. "What happened to you two? "Where were you?" he asked, worry evident in his voice. I couldn't speak, but Mom looked at him and said, "We just got lost, Bill. Everything's fine." He frowned, sensing she wasn't telling the whole truth but didn't press her. We climbed into his old truck and drove back to the village in grave silence. Years have passed since then. I grew up, started a family, and never told anyone about that night in the forest. Sometimes in my nightmares I still hear her voice, the same one that called my name. I know the devil exists, and he hides there, in the shadows of the forest, waiting for his moment to call me again. And when my son asked me that night if the devil was real, I lied to him.